and welcome to a quick how to swap your engine checklist. So, big shout out to Adam from 621 who was in the UK. Check out their stuff. Check out his YouTube channel, 621. He does a really cool vlog series. So, how to swap your motor in a simple checklist. Now, the main thing is to pull your engine out, okay? Putting it back in is way easier. All right, so you have a few simple things: fluids, wiring, top, bottom, mounts, and yank it out. Before you do anything, disconnect and remove your battery so you don't get shocked. First thing you want to do is you want to drain all your coolant, because you're going to have to disconnect all the coolant lines. Not all of them, but most of them. So you want to go ahead and drain that fluid, and then pull the radiator out with the bottom and top hoses. Then what you want to do is, while that's draining, you want to disconnect your wiring harness. So you're going to always have a harness on this side and on that side. So you're going to disconnect it, keep the harness on the motor, fold it up, and that's pretty much it on this side. If you have AC, leave all this AC hooked up, just unbolt it from the motor. Then you're going to come over to this side. You're going to disconnect the harness over here. Wherever it leads to, just disconnect it, just pull it apart. Then you're going to have one wire in here. Then you're going to have one wire in the fuse box to disconnect, which is this one. If you notice, this runs down to the harness, and it shouldn't be too hard. Now that you have your coolant drained and your wiring harness disconnected, you want to go ahead, jack the car up on jack stands, take your wheels off. And then you want to drain your transmission. And the reason why is that you're going to pull the axles out, so when you pull the engine out of the car, transmission fluid will go everywhere, so you want to go ahead and drain that. You really don't have to drain the motor oil unless you want to. Once you've disconnected the harness and drained the coolant, then you have to do the top, is what I call the top side. So you're going to disconnect things like the brake booster line. You can disconnect the brake booster line, which is hooked up to the back of the intake manifold. You know, throttle cable if you haven't already done that. Fuel line. Come to this side. Fuel line. And also your clutch line. So there's two 12mm bolts here just to take the slave off. Just set it to the side. It'll be fine. After you disconnect all the coolant lines that are attached to the firewall and the radiator, you should be good with that. Now you have to do the bottom. And the bottom is simply this: headers, shift linkage, and axles. That's it. Those three things. Now that seems simple enough, but taking the axles out and disconnecting the shift linkage is probably the two biggest pain in the ass things that you'll have to do when pulling out an engine. But to do that, what you're going to do is you're going to take the wheel off, and then if you notice, the suspension will have a fork on it. It has a 17mm bolt with a 17mm nut. Remove that, and then a 14mm bolt that removes the fork from the actual strut. Once you do that, you have to remove the lower ball joint bolt. And when you do that, get ready to pray to your God and find the biggest hammer that you can, and you want to hammer on the lower control arm. Do not hit the bolt that is the lower ball joint. But once you hit that hard enough, as many times as it takes, it will finally separate. Once that separates, the knuckle will lift out, and you can remove your axle nut, and the axle will slide out. Then you have to get your axle out of the transmission, which is pretty easy. Just take a flathead screwdriver, stick it in between there, or a pry bar, stick it in between there and pop it out. You'll feel a little pop. Same thing goes for the driver side axle to remove. It's the same process. Just pray to your God, find the biggest hammer you can, and hit the lower control arm, not the ball joint stud. Your exhaust, that should be a couple of bolts unless it's been welded together. If that's the case, just take off the headers. Once you get the axles out and the exhaust disconnected, you only have one more thing that's going to be a pain in the ass to remove: the shift linkage. Now to remove the shift linkage, you have two bars. One is held onto the transmission by a 12mm bolt. That's easy, take that out, pops right off. Then you have the infamous bitch pin, which is a pain in the ass. You're gonna need a specific size punch to punch the bitch pin out of the shift linkage. You need a hammer and the right size punch to get that bitch pin out. There might be a cover over the bitch pin. It pops right off with your hand. If you do not have the right size punch, you can use something like a long 10mm bolt. That'll work perfect. You can kind of hammer it in there. It's in there pretty tight. Hammer it away until that little bitch pin pops out, and then the shift linkage will fall off. Once you have all that done, which is pretty simple, remember, fluid, wiring, top, bottom, mount, and then you yank it out. Couple of tips. One, go ahead and take your throttle body off, because if you break that TPS sensor, which will happen a lot of times while lifting the motor out, it will break very easily. So go ahead and just take the throttle body off. It's 4 12mm bolts, not a big deal. Now when you go to pull the engine out, you want to chain up the motor on this side and on this side. But when you do, you want to favor this side, so that as you're pulling the motor out, this side will drop, because the motor needs to come out kind of at an angle to come out from the top. And the reason why is you'll need that little bit of angle to kind of clear the mount on this side. Once you do that, once you have the motor on a chain with some tension, remove the rear bracket on the back, which is traditionally a pain in the ass. It's two 19mm bolts on the bottom. I don't know if you can see that. And then 117 on the top. It's best to go ahead and get that bracket out, finagle it out however you can, because it's best to have that out of the way. Remove the transmission bracket and mount if that's possible. You can on the EKs, you got a little bit more room on the EKs, EJs, yeah, EJ6s, whatever. So you're gonna want to get that back bracket off first, then the transmission mount. Remove this one last. Now you do have the AC bracket that is mounted here, and then another vibration bracket that's mounted there. Usually I don't have mine because I lost it. Anyway, pull that off and then slowly pull the motor out ever so carefully. Make sure you don't hit anything or break anything, and it shouldn't be that hard. If you have an EF like a CRX, I believe there's a mount on the front here. You know, just go ahead and take that off. That's really a stability mount. It is a little bit tighter with the CRXs and the EFs to kind of finagle things in and out, but it's really not too bad. Now, as far as reinstalling the motor, it's obviously the reverse of everything, but getting it to bolt in is the trick. So when you go to install your new motor, once you got the old one out, it's best to put the angle on it that I said was kind of tilted, so that the transmission side is leaning down and the timing belt side is up higher. That way, when you lower it down and you bolt the motor in, you want to try to get this mount on first. Once you get that mount on first, go for this one. Once you have those two, you can then wiggle the motor to get the transmission rear bracket on, the engine rear bracket, and then the other ones are pretty simple. Once you have the two side mounts hooked up, you can pretty much take the chain off and you know, move the motor around as you see fit. If you're using solid motor mounts, it's a little more tricky, but it's not that hard. And I know sometimes you figure, hey, let's have some friends come over and they'll help me pull this motor out. That usually doesn't work because they just want to joke around and make fun of you the whole time. So I suggest getting everything done while everybody's not there, and then when you're ready to pull it out, have definitely somebody to help you. At least 1 or 2 other people if you don't know what you're doing. The only difference between someone who's done it before and someone who's never done it before is really confidence. It's really simple. You just have to make sure you get the coolant lines off, fuel lines off, the wiring harness unhooked, the shift linkage disconnected, the axles out, and the exhaust disconnected. And that's pretty much, you know, the gist of how to pull an engine out. You know, if you know what you're doing and you've got someone to help you who knows what they're doing, you know, we've taken engines out in less than like 45 minutes. Especially little D-series motors. But it's not hard. Have no fear. That's pretty much it. How to pull your engine out checklist. It's really simple. Don't be scared. Even if you mess up, you can always spend more money and fix it. It seems like a big job, but it's really not. That's pretty much it. And see you guys next time.
Sitting here doing this, not paying attention.